In 1989, Doctor Who was cancelled after 26 years. The effects of this cancellation would go on to affect the show and the franchise up until this day, and there would be no official return to the series until 2005 with the revival series with Russell T Davies. But what if things had been different that year? What if Doctor Who remained on the television after season 26? What would have become of the show had it went all the way through the 1990s? And how different would the show be compared to our own version of the show if it lasted up to the modern day? Hello, my name is Optical Spectre and this is Doctor Who, the cancelled years. In this series I'll be answering one question: what if Doctor Who survived cancellation in 1989? With the basic premise now out of the way, let's find out what would have happened in this episode. Season 30 of Doctor Who would have marked the 30th anniversary of the show. To celebrate 30 years of TV and surviving the downfall of success between 1985 and 1990, Season 30 would have featured many callbacks to the show in each episode. This would have been the first season since Season 26 to air on BBC One, as Alan Yentob, the new controller, would have moved the show back to BBC One with him. This would have been the final season to be script edited by Ben Aronovich, as it is unlikely he would have done more than 4 or 5 years. Replacing him would have been writer of Season 27's Crime of the Century, Colin Brake. Furthermore, this would have been the final season for Julia Swahala as Rain Cunningham, as Swahala would have gone on to star in Absolutely Fabulous. Replacing Rain would have been new companion Bernice Summerfield. For Bernice's actress, Lisa Bauman would have been cast. Bauman would have been no stranger to Doctor Who, having already played Kara in 1989's Survival. In our own universe, Lisa Bauman voices Bernice Summerfield in the Big Finish stories. The Doctor would have also gotten a slight makeover this season. With Griffiths now getting clearly older, it would have been decided to lose the goatee he spouted for seasons 28 and 29 and replace it with a full beard. A new police box prop would have been introduced this season, after 13 years with the Tom Yardley Jones prop. The new prop would have been the one as seen in more than 30 years in the TARDIS and a skit in Heavy Einfield and Chums.
Who are you? I'm Doctor Who, who are you looking at? Calm down, eh? What are you saying? Where's all these friggin' Daleks then, eh? Come on, I'll bleed exterminate you when I get older.
However, the prop in Doctor Who would have been a darker shade of blue, and the telephone panel would have been a full blue. A new logo would have also been introduced in this season. It would have gone back to a more simple and basic design similar to the 60s and John Pertwee logos. And finally, a new title sequence would have been introduced in this season alongside a new theme tune. The new theme tune would have been done by composer Mark Ayres. According to Ayres himself, his version of the theme would have been a lot darker and would have harkened back to the Delia Darkshire and Peter Howell arrangements. The new title sequence would have used updated graphics and would have been produced again by Cal Video, who produced the Sylvester McCoy and former Richard Griffiths titles. Like the logo and the theme music, the titles would have harkened back to those of the 1970s and 1960s titles, and would have returned to the original format of the titles instead of how they were for the McCoy and former Griffiths titles. Now with all that out the way, let's discuss the 6 stories that would have featured in season 30. The first story would have been Election Day, a 3-part story written by Russell T Davies. Election Day is an original story and would have shown how Gallifrey deals with the election of the next Lord President. After the events of Lungbarrow, Flavia stepped down as Lady President, so a new one would have been needed. The two candidates are Romana and a new time lady to the show named Colleen, played by Joanna Lumley. And just a quick disclaimer, Colleen is not named after a weird ass music video you may or may not have seen, or a quick scoping Modern Warfare video. This story would have saw Romana starting to lose the election and her assistant Leela getting suspicious of Colleen rigging the election, so she calls the Doctor in to investigate. The Doctor tries to ignore the whole situation as he doesn't care for politics, but he is forced into the situation. Parts 1 and 2 would have played off as an investigation and murder story, investigating and interviewing all the candidates and some of the public, hoping to find evidence against Colleen, and solving a murder mystery as members of the High Council are slowly being killed off. At the end of part 2, the Doctor, Rain and Leela discover Colleen's TARDIS in the lower part of the city, and inside they discover her plans, which reveals that she has been rigging the election by blackmail. With the case closed, the Doctor attempts to leave as he wants nothing more to do with the whole situation. But his mind has changed when he finds more documents showing that if Colleen claims power, she would send Gallifrey into a war planet, change the laws of time in her favour, and commence war with the galaxy. Part 3 sees the three exposing Colleen and discovering that her assistant had been murdering the council, so that they could replace them with power with sleeper agents who would only obey Colleen. At the end of the story, Colleen is thrown into suspension, her assistant is executed, and because there is no other rival against Romana, she is placed as the new president. The second story would have been Transit, a 3-part story written by Ben Aronovich. Transit would have saw the Doctor and Rain in the year 2109, where a new form of travel technology in the form of the Soul Transit system has been taken over by an unknown entity who is trying to break into the universe. The story would have been told from 2 different perspectives, the first being from the Doctor, who teams up with a woman named Kadiatu and travels from planet to planet, trying to find who or what has hijacked the transit system. Through the Doctor and Kadiatu, we learn that the technology that has been used on the transit system was originally a part of the T-Mat transporters from 1969, the Seeds of Death, and that after the events of said story, there was a 1000-day war between mankind and the Ice Warriors. The second perspective of the story is from Rain. At the beginning of the story, the TARDIS is hit by an oncoming train, resulting in the TARDIS getting stuck in the wall and Rain sent flying. She ends up on Pluto and possessed by the same entity controlling the Soul Transit system, and begins riots and causing chaos with a group of people on Pluto. When the Doctor eventually reaches Pluto, he finds the possessed Rain and discovers the entity, who he nicknames Fred. He is eventually able to stop Fred, free Rain, and recover the TARDIS. This story would have been based off the 1992 Virgin New Adventures novel Transit. The differences between this version and the novel includes 8 and Rain being replaced with 7 and his new companion at the time, Bernice Summerfield. The third story would have been Love and War, a 3-part story written by Paul Cornell. Love and War would have introduced a new companion, Bernice Summerfield, an archaeologist from the 26th century. The story would have been set on the green planet Heaven, a currently peace world for humans and Draconians. It is also a graveyard planet for those who died in the war against the Daleks. The story would have saw the Doctor and Rain stopping a fungi race named the Hufi from conquering and invading Heaven with the help of a group of psychic travellers and Bernice Summerfield. For the lot of the story, we would have focused on Rain as she begins to befriend one of the psychic travellers named Jan, a pirate knight with fire powers. She begins showing strong feelings for Jan and is tempted to leave the Doctor and travel with the travellers, much to the Doctor's distaste. The story would have shown a darker side to the 8th Doctor and would have saw him forced back into the role of the manipulator, like the 7th incarnation, as he uses Jan to stop the Hufi from taking over Heaven when Jan becomes possessed by the Hufi and uses his fire powers to destroy them. This would have left Rain furious at the Doctor and refusing to travel with him anymore, but being angry at himself and the situation he was now in, he forces Rain on board the TARDIS against her will. And in all the fuss, Bernice accidentally finds herself on board the TARDIS as well. The story would have ended on a cliffhanger with the TARDIS coming under attack from an unknown force and crashing throughout space. This story is based off the 1992 Virgin New Adventures novel which shares the same name. The differences between this version and the novel is 8 and Rain being replaced with 7 and 8, and the story also would have saw Ace departing at the end of it. The fourth story would have been Blood Heat, a 4-part story written by Jim Mortimer. Blood Heat was to be Julius Wahala's final story as Rain Cunningham. The story would have picked up where Love and War ended, as the TARDIS crash lands onto Earth in what appears to be dinosaur times. But while exploring, the Doctor, Rain and Benny soon discovered they are in fact in an overgrown 20th century London. The story would have been set on Earth, however Earth in an alternate timeline, where the events of 1970s Doctor Who and the Silurians played out differently. In this timeline, the Silurians virus never got a proper cure and wiped out most of the population. And also in this timeline, the third Doctor is dead after being killed by Morka the Silurian. The story would have saw the Doctor, Rain and Benny meeting an alternative Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, an alternative Liz Shaw, an alternative Benton, and an alternative Joe Grant, along with an older and alternative version of Morka, who has now become the leader of the Silurians. It would have saw the three of them trying to prevent an all-out destructive war between humans and Silurians, and trying to make peace between the two races while trying to find out how they ended up in this alternative timeline. It also would have saw a different perspective to the 8th Doctor and Rain, as Rain no longer likes or even trusts the Doctor, and as such, the chemistry between the two is very sour, though the Doctor does try to make things better for Rain. The three of them are eventually able to make peace between the two races and attempt to leave. But while attempting to leave, they find that this universe is slowly draining the life out of their universe, so the Doctor has no choice but to destroy the parallel universe to save their own. This upsets and angers Rain, fully bringing the end to her and the Doctor's friendship. Rain tells the Doctor to take her home and to never come back for her, which she does. The Doctor offers to take Benny back home, but she decides to travel with the Doctor and to explore the universe, so he vows never to interfere with her life or anyone else's again. This story is based off the 1993 Virgin New Adventures novel which shares the same name. The differences between this version and the novel is 8 and Rain being replaced with 7 and 8, and a few alterations to the main story here and there, as it's the TV show and some of the stuff in the novel is a bit too graphic for TV. The fifth story would have been Battle of the Daleks, a 4-part story written by Colin Brake. Battle of the Daleks is an original story, and it would have ended the Dalek Civil War, which began back in Resurrection of the Daleks. With Davros presumed dead after the events of the last of the Daleks, the Imperials and the Renegades form an alliance and focus on fighting other worlds, rather than each other. The story would have saw the Doctor and Bernice leading a resistance group on the planet Armstrong against the Daleks. For the first half of the story, it would have played out a bit like the Daleks' invasion of Earth. The Daleks have conquered the planet and are now mining it for fuel to power a weapon named the Eraser, which completely destroys any programmed DNA of the current planet it is on. The twist comes in about halfway when it's revealed that both factions of Daleks were planning on betraying the other, and then another Dalek civil war breaks out on the planet. The Renegades lose the battle and they would have made the Imperials the surviving race, meaning that the white and gold Dalek design would only appear on screen now instead of the old grey and black designs. However, the Imperials on this planet are defeated by the Doctor and Benny when they reprogram the Erasure to attack and wipe out the Imperials instead of the inhabitants of Armstrong, saving the planet and the inhabitants. The final story would have been The 8 Doctors, a 90-minute special written by Ben Aronovich. The 8 Doctors is an original story and would have been the 30th anniversary of Doctor Who. Like the 3 Doctors and 5 Doctors, this would have been a multi-Doctor story, starring John Pertwee, Tom Baker, Peter Davison, Colin Baker, Sylvester McCoy and Richard Griffiths. However, unlike the previous specials, this one plays out differently. The story would have saw the Ronnie trying to erase the Doctor from the universe by travelling his first 2 incarnations in an alternative universe where they'll be trapped forever. The 8th Doctor learns of his previous incarnations going missing and attempts to rescue them, but before they can be freed, he activates one of the Ronnie's traps, trapping himself in a time lock while switching all of his other incarnations around, meaning Doctors 3 to 7 are thrown either into their past or their future and into a completely different situation with all their TARDISes frozen in time and no escape. The third Doctor finds himself with Perry Brown in the year 2003 and has to prevent the Cybermen from invading the Earth again. The fourth Doctor switches place with the 8th Doctor and ends up in the time lock himself. He is now stuck and has to guide Bernice through the Rani's TARDIS to a control deck within her ship while she is being hunted by one of the Rani's servants. The 5th Doctor finds himself with Liz Shaw and has to stop a rogue Sontaran from destroying the Earth by tampering with a nuclear reactor to make the Earth a breeding ground for Sontaran clones. The 6th Doctor finds himself with Sarah Jane Smith and has to finish creating an antidote to stop a nesting plague that's slowly covering the Earth and the humans in plastic. The 7th Doctor finds himself with Nyssa and has to prevent the Master from poisoning the Earth in a deadly nerve gas that will cause the Earth to go extinct, which ends up resulting in the start of the Great Plague. This would have been the Anthony Ainley Master still, however this is the Master prior to the events of the King's Demons. And the 8th Doctor finds himself with Ace and has to stop a Dalek invasion in Egypt in the year 40 BC. Eventually the 4th Doctor is able to contact his incarnations about the Master's plan, and Bernice is able to unfreeze all the TARDISes and free the first 2 incarnations, and the 4th Doctor giving all the Doctors the chance to escape from the Rani's trap. At the end of the story, the 8th Doctor reverses the Rani's engineering and traps it in the time lock herself until he decides that the time is right to unfreeze her. Then we'd get a scene on a planet where all the Doctors return to drop off the right companions in TARDIS and say goodbye to each other, and the story would have ended on the 8th Doctor and Bernice. While the 8 Doctors is an original story, it is heavily based on the real 30th anniversary for Doctor Who, Dimensions in Time. This story is very much just Dimensions in Time, but done better. And that concludes season 30 of Doctor Who. This would have been one of the more popular seasons for the show. The 8 Doctors would have been acclaimed as one of the fan favourites and would have been the first story to be released on DVD in 1999. And that concludes this video. In the next overview we'll be discussing season 31, the introduction of a new companion, and Doctor Who becoming an independent production.